Hi, this is Alex Gaines for part one of Walking Through Rhode Island. So as I mentioned in the introduction, this webcast is going to be covering just different interesting voices throughout the Ocean State, hearing what people are doing, learning cool stories, and just talking to interesting people. So with that said, for part one, I have a very special guest. I decided to bring my own mom, Sharon Gaines. Whatever you want to call her, she's my mother, and she's been incredibly supportive throughout my entire life, and I just wanted her to be the first person to appear on this webcast. So how are you doing, Mom?
I'm good, Alex. Thank you so much for giving me this honor.
Thanks. So thank you for joining me. I mean, taking a risk, but I think it's really, I think this is going to go places. So I guess what I would say is, let's talk about what we're going to cover for this half hour or however long it actually lasts. But what we're going to do is talk about your volunteer experience. So I want to start off with the love story, where you met Dad. I think that's a great story. My mom is a nurse and my dad is a doctor, and they met in a hospital. So it's kind of, it's a nice little meet cute. But in all seriousness, that the majority of the coverage today will be on my mom's philanthropic work, the volunteer work she does with the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island, commonly referred to as the Alliance. So she'll be talking about her starting at what was then the Federation, then going into the Alliance, and then eventually, when she was done with her work as chair of the Alliance, she became the Federation chair, and she'll talk a little bit about her time there too. So without further ado, I guess I'll just jump right in and ask you. So first, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you and your past, and maybe you meeting Dad in Mount Sinai?
Sure, I'd love to. So I grew up on Long Island, and I got an undergraduate degree in biology, and then went on and got a master's of science in nursing, and was looking for my first job as an RN in the New York area. And I ended up at Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I was a pediatric nurse, and I was on the adolescent unit. And that's where I was working when, each year we'd meet the new batch of incoming interns and residents in pediatrics. And so there were a number of us who were unattached at the time. And we met one of the new pediatric interns was a guy named Sharon Gaines, and he was from the Boston area, but he had gone to Columbia to medical school, to Columbia University's Physicians and Surgeons. And we chatted it up a bit, and then he started in July, and then finally somewhere around December, we were talking more frequently, and he asked me out on New Year's Day of 1983, and that's when we went out on our first date. We kept it very quiet because we didn't know what was going to be, but it went well. And by that October, we got engaged, and we were married in August of 85. And we finished, and we stayed in New York until he finished up his residency. It's 3 years in pediatrics. And we stayed in New York until then, which was in 1986, the summer of 86, we moved, and we headed down to North Carolina.
And I'm just gonna go circle back to some of that time. So must have been kind of crazy there at the hospital. I don't know. I've heard a little bit of stories about how things have changed since the days have passed, but hearing from Dad, at least, some of those hours sound absolutely insane. So you must have been around each other a lot during those times, just with all the shifts and kind of wait. I think I heard at one point Dad said he was sleeping in a closet or something to catch him.
Yeah, back in those days, the interns and residents would have to be on call every 3 or 4 nights, and being on call meant that you got to the hospital at 7 in the morning usually, and you couldn't leave again until 36 hours later. And in the field of pediatrics, as with a lot of them, you're up most of that time during the night. As an RN, I worked shift work, so I mostly did days. So I would see him during the day. Didn't always see him all that much because our adolescent unit was in a different place than the other pediatric floors. So when he was on the adolescent unit, I saw him all the time. The one disadvantage once we came out with our relationship is my supervisor would have the on-call schedule for the physicians, and she'd say to me, I noticed that Alan's on call tonight, so can you do a double? So that meant that I started work at 7 in the morning, and instead of going home at 3, I stayed for the next shift and worked until 11. But the on-call rooms were really small. They were like closets. They had one bed and that was it, when you could escape there for a little bit of shut-eye. So it was a wild time. And then the same thing when he was in the emergency room, the pediatric emergency room, it would be 12-hour shifts, and you'd be on for 12 hours and then off for 12 hours. But, nights were no picnic.
Wow, yeah. Sounds like a struggle, but I think it all worked out in the end. So dad's got his own little place. You're working with him in Rhode Island, and yeah, that's good. I'm glad it worked out, but I think they've made it a little easier since then, where it's not quite as many hours back to back, and you get it kind of more of a handle on things than you had in the past, where it's not quite as much of a taxing, stress. So, but anyway, let's get back to the story. So you were talking about how you moved from New York to North Carolina. That might have been a spoiler alert. You might not have said that yet, but I'm well aware of my own past and your past. So yeah, so talk about North Carolina.
Yeah, so we headed down to North Carolina. Dad had accepted a fellowship in pediatric allergy and immunology at Duke University, which was, one of the leading places in the country at that time, doing research in the area of immunological diseases in children. When we first got there, I went looking for a job, and I did some, what they call per diem work, at both Duke and University of North Carolina Medical Center. And then I was offered a position as a nurse recruiter at University of North Carolina's Medical Center. And I accepted it. And so we had a very fun year of me being a Tar Heel and Dad being a Blue Devil, and having that rivalry, which is, probably nationally known as one of the key rivalries in the country when it comes to basketball.
It's like Red Sox, Yankees, Ohio State, Michigan. It's a key rivalry in the entire nation. It's not just basketball. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really it was fun. We had a good time. I mean, I wasn't such a Tar Heel fan, but, I couldn't help but make little Tar Heel cookies. The Tar Heel is a foot with a blackened heel, a Tar Heel because there was tar on the beaches. And I would make little Tar Heel cookies and bring them to all of our Duke holiday parties. And then while I was down there, I got pregnant with Ben, your older brother. And when he was born, we probably had, equally high stacks of little Tar Heel sweatsuits and little Blue Devil sweatsuits. And I had to be careful what I put him in. So
that's cool. Before we jump into the story with Ben and, the rest of the time there, I wanted to just kind of go back to what you were saying about recruiting nurses at UNC. So as a nurse, you were also recruiting nurses, and how exactly was that done back in the day?
Well, I didn't actually work on a floor. I was only dealing with people that were coming into the area who were looking for jobs. And I was hired specifically to start out with, to try to recruit. They were expanding their intensive care units and, becoming more specialized, which is, I think, the norm now. But then it was usually just one, sometimes 2 ICUs, one that covered people with medical and surgical differences. But at the time, they were putting in one for cardiothoracic surgery, open heart surgeries, and they were doing a neurosurgery ICU. And we were looking to hire nurses specifically for those different ICUs. Excuse me?
Specialized recruiting, kind of.
Yeah. And then, as time went on, it just became more general recruiting. And I did it for just shy of a year. I worked the day that he was born, but that was the end of my working in North Carolina.
You want to go into that?
Yeah, no. So I mean, then I just, I was lucky enough to be able to be a stay-at-home mom, and that's what I did. I stayed at home. I had a few women friends who had kids a little bit older, and and I just was. It was a good time, and Dad was working, and it was, for the most part, the hours as a fellow were much better than his hours as a resident. So we had it was a nice place to live for a year.
That's great. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit. You came back to Providence, had two more sons, myself and Zach, both in Providence. And then, X number of years later, you start getting involved in some of the nonprofit work, some of the volunteer work at the Jewish Federation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. A number of my friends were involved and invited me to attend some events. And so I went, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. And I became more involved. At that time, there was a women's division, a women's alliance that was a subset of what was then the Jewish Federation of Rhode Island. And I started doing volunteer work there. I sat on a number of committees. I did a number of solicitations, which, and became much more involved in the campaign activities, which was the fundraising part of it. And I really enjoyed it. And over the years, I sort of climbed the ranks and became campaign chair when one of my good friends was the president of the Women's Alliance, with the caveat that I would become president afterwards. And, and so I did. I sort of just climbed the ranks and did everything I was supposed to do. When you're involved with the Women's Alliance, at some point they suck you into the general federation stuff as well. So that, I started sitting on the board, and I, had some low level, kind of governance positions. But it got me involved there. I also did a lot of work with the Community Relations Council, which was the public policy, government, social activism arm of it. And that was where I pretty much had focused my energies at the onset.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then, so at some point in your past, you transitioned, right? So you were kind of focused on this Women's Alliance, that kind of subset of the broader federation. And then you got pulled in over time into the broader federation. At what point did the federation start saying, well, why are we the federation just kind of this one entity when we can kind of combine forces with the JCC, with the Bureau of Jewish Education, and create the alliance? I know you were very involved in that kind of process of when they decided to make that merge and become the alliance. So I wanted to hear a little bit about that story.
So the federation had been going on, and it was raising its money. Unfortunately, it was a time, we had some economic dips here in Rhode Island, and all the agencies sort of suffered a little bit. And at the time I think I was associate campaign chair for the federation, but I was president of the Bureau of Jewish Education. And the Jewish Community Center was starting to falter a little bit as well, and the Bureau was having its own issues. So we decided it was a good time to sit around the table and try to figure out ways that we could successfully keep the community going at a level that continued to benefit everybody. In looking at the numbers and the numbers of volunteers and stuff, the decision was made in probably 2009 which was right after the big 2008 crash, and everybody was trying to come out of it, to merge parts of the community. So we looked at what each of us brought to the table and made the decision that we would move forward with trying to merge the Jewish Alliance, the Jewish Federation, with the Bureau of Jewish Education and the Jewish Community Center, since both the Jewish Federation and the Bureau lived in the JCC building, and how could we transition that? So, we had a few informal meetings, and then we put together a formal integration committee, which was made up of the three presidents. That was myself and the president of the JCC and the president of the Federation at the time. And we began working with an outside consultant to help.
One second, thank you. That was really great. And I'll let you get back to it in 1 second. I just wanted to kind of clear something up for any viewers that the Jewish Community Center, JCC, is kind of like the Jewish counterpart to the YMCA. So the YMCA is a Christian organization. The JCC is a community center, by Jews, for Jews primarily, but they do have other people come in. But, it's just kind of, that's the aspect of, this large building is for the community center, but it was actually housing the Federation and the Bureau of Jewish Education at the same time. So this decision was made, let's kind of capitalize on the fact that we're all in the same building, especially during these tight times, and all come together and form this one entity called the Alliance.
Great. So I was fortunate, or maybe, no, I did consider it being fortunate. I did chair the integration process with my two, the other two presidents being very active members of the committee. We each brought a couple people from our different organizations to the table, and we worked probably for close to a year on creating a what we saw as a unified structure. It was a challenge. The Federation, for example, had a 60+ member board, and the JCC and the Bureau both had very active boards. And now we were going to come together, and one of the things that and we had different task forces that worked on, the governance process, how we would raise money, and writing bylaws. And so, we went down to a board of only about 30 people or 40. I think it's the exact numbers between 28 and 38. And you had all these people you now were going to be displacing. So we tried to make sure we were taking into that account and setting up a strong community, a strong committee process that would allow room for more and more people to do it. And we then put together a new governing body. We decided to choose someone who had not been involved with the integration process so intimately, but was a well-known member of the community, to become the first chair of the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island, which was the name that we settled on ultimately. And on January 1st of 2011, 1111, we officially launched as the Jewish Alliance. And at the time I became the campaign chair for the Jewish Alliance. So
great. Yeah, I think, we're going to go into the next part, I think, but just before we put a, stamp on the Jewish Alliance, it does great work. So if you want to, you can talk about it, but I'll just speak a few words to it just to give it its credit. It's like, not only does it do giving, what it does is it kind of acts as a capital allocation hub for Jewish giving. So what it does is it gives money and support to programs in the state of Rhode Island and locally, as well as giving some money overseas to overseas programs in various countries like Israel. And then it also has the kind of, with the JCC, the community center has a number of kind of programming like basketball, a gym, all sorts of different activities, and kind of, educational activities as well for children. So it's kind of like this all-inclusive hub for Jewish life in the state of Rhode Island. So I think it was smart to become the Alliance, and I think it seems to have kind of settled to a good kind of equilibrium now, but of course there's always going to be ups and downs. But now, after you had 3 years as the chair of the Alliance, that's the term limit, right? So you do 3 years and then now you're expected to move on. And
right.
Traditionally, right, you move on to the Federation Foundation. Is that correct? I want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So one of, the Jewish Federation had a rather large endowment, and the Jewish Community Center and the Bureau had smaller endowments. And we decided that we needed to sort of protect the money that, had been given to the different organizations in perpetuity, from any potential risks that might present itself, particularly with, having both a early childhood center and a gym facility, that God forbid there's a slip and fall or something. So at the time that we merged and we became the Jewish Alliance, we spun off the endowment piece, and we created the Jewish Federation Foundation, which manages all of the endowments, donor advised funds, et cetera, that people have established to help support the community in perpetuity. And so,
one more second. So an endowment, if anyone's unfamiliar with it watching, It's like a lot of universities have these endowments too. So what happens is when there's giving to an institution, donations, basically what happens is they kind of pool it all together. And what they want to do is you want to kind of keep that pool of donations as stable, if not growing, as possible. And what you're doing is you're using that large sum of money to basically find ways to generate interest off that endowment that will then not only pay for the cost of upkeep for the endowment, but actually hopefully grow it and then be able to support the cause even more. So it's when you give money to an institution, it doesn't always spend that money right away, but sometimes what it does is it pools it in these endowments and then use that as kind of like this rock or foundation with which to build, the interest income can actually build some of the change and progress off of that. So back to you.
Yep. So we did that and we spun it off. And the traditional pathway for the Federation presidents was to chair the endowment committee. So it became a natural transition that when the chair of the alliance finishes their 3-year term, you step into the role as chair of the Federation Foundation, which oversees the endowments and the investments that we make with it. So we were, doing that, and we were 5-6 years in with the alliance growing and becoming more successful and more secure in its place in the community. And we were approached by the Rhode Island Foundation, which is the largest, I think, holder of investment funds in the state of Rhode Island. It has endowments. Some of them are restricted to very specific things. Some of them are unrestricted and just help go into their general pool. But we were approached by them to consider moving our endowment over to theirs, with the belief that by taking our funds and commingling it with all the Rhode Island Foundation funds, we would get a better return on our investments, that we would be able to invest with different types of funds that we might not have been able to because we weren't that big. And I believe at the time so we went back and forth and we hammered out a lot of details. And we have a board that is comprised of people who are nominated by the Rhode Island Foundation, as well as people nominated by the Jewish Alliance, so that it's a bipartisan, as it were, board. But mostly, its main caveat is protecting the interests of the Jewish community and the Jewish funds that we have there. And we made the decision to move our endowment and move it over to the Rhode Island Foundation. I think we brought their bottom line up to $1 billion when we added ours to what they already raised. But we still maintain, it was very important to us that we still maintained a separate identity from the Rhode Island Foundation. So anything that, we made the decision that all of our mailings and letterheads and stuff would still go out under the Jewish Federation Foundation, that the Rhode Island Foundation doesn't approach people who might be part of the Jewish community first, that they direct them towards us. We have a liaison from the Rhode Island Foundation who comes to all of our foundation meetings and is as a resource for us. We still have an investment committee, but we don't make investment decisions. It's more of a just so we know sort of what's going on, but the chair of our investment committee sits on the Rhode Island Foundation Investment Committee. So I think it's been a successful endeavor. I think we've made, the interest, as you were saying, we've been making more money because we're part of a larger pool now. So I'd like to believe that it was a good decision and people are happy with it.
I'll tell you, I wasn't as involved when you were working on this, but from a third-party perspective, it definitely makes sense to me. I think it's great, the idea that you can maintain your endowment and investment identity, right? It's still the Jewish Alliance. It's still the Jewish Alliance's money. It's the Jewish Alliance funds, but you can kind of capitalize on economies of scale. And what I mean by that is, you're now able to pool not only your resources, but also pool the overhead costs. So what you're doing is you're driving costs down. You're actually raising the expected return rate of the investment. So the rate on investment, return on investment, is going to go up because now you have kind of a bigger pool of funds and bigger pool of investments with which you can now kind of direct it towards more sizable opportunities, I believe. So I think it's a really smart approach. I think you guys did a great job with it, and we'll see. These things take time to really iron themselves out, but it does seem like it made sense as an approach, and we'll see over the next couple of years how that really turns out.
Absolutely.
So yeah, well, thank you for covering a broad spectrum of your time. You know, for all the way from you're starting out with Dad in New York, all the way to now with the endowment and the Rhode Island Foundation being rolled into by the Jewish Alliance. And I think, you know, I don't think I have anything else I wanted to cover, but I'll give you a second if you wanted to just talk about anything, or if we're good, we can sign off.
Yeah, I think we're great. This was wonderful. I hope this is the first of many, many, many more successful episodes on your YouTube channel. This was really good.
Yeah, and I'm hopefully going to start smoothing it out over time and getting better and better. So
Yeah, you were great.
bearing with me for this first part, and hopefully it only goes up from here. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, I love you much, Mom.
Bye-bye. Love you too.